Chapter 467, Horia 2. The Centipede Mountains alone would have been difficult enough, but on top of that, a barrier had been placed around the entire city. The Centipede Mountains circle around the entire outskirts of the city while the sky is covered with a barrier made up of black magic and the dark power of destruction, Sienna muttered with a furrowed brow. Regarding the barrier's level of complexity, I'll need to get a little bit closer to tell for sure, but I'd say it's just so. But the technical level of the barrier itself isn't the problem, Anise spoke up. That's right, Sienna quickly agreed. Even if the barrier was technically weak with the immense amount of dark power that has been poured into it, it would still be difficult to break through. On top of that, they've even covered the barrier with a layer of the dark power of destruction. Since they've been that thorough with its creation, it's now virtually impossible to break through the barrier with just magic. So even our goddess of magic still has things that are impossible for her? Eugene asked with a grin. It was only meant to be a joke, but Sienna just puffed out her chest as if she wasn't the slightest bit embarrassed and responded, "That's pending goddess of magic to you." In the face of this proud response, Eugene lost the urge to keep teasing her. So Eugene just played along, alright then, Miss Pending Goddess of Magic. If I had completed my transformation into the Goddess of Magic, then well, it should have been possible. However, for now, I can't say for sure whether or not it definitely is possible for the current me, Sienna said with some uncertainty. If it was just the black magic alone, it might have been possible for her to forcefully break through, but the sky above Horia was currently covered with a layer of the dark power of destruction. The dark power of destruction was antithetical to both magic and mana. Even if Sienna were to employ her absolute decree on top of her best efforts, it would be difficult to pierce through such a thick layer of the dark power of destruction. Just like how Sienna had yet to completely transform into the goddess of magic, her absolute decree still wasn't as absolute as it could be. "I'll just hammer it from above," Eugene stated as he impatiently scraped his feet on the floor. At this statement, Rhaenyra stuck her head out from under his cloak. "Hey benefactor, you should believe in me. I can definitely tear open a hole in the sky with my majestic breath." Eugene paused for a moment before saying, "No, you should just stay quietly inside of the cloak. Without me you won't be able to fly into the sky, benefactor," Rhaenyra insisted. Eugene just snorted. "Why shouldn't I be able to fly into the sky without you? I can fly just as well all by myself." "Let's go there together," Anise said as she stroked Rhaenyra's head, which looked a little strange still sticking out of Eugene's cloak like this, with a smile. "Although I've said this before, Hamel, being overprotective isn't a good habit." Eugene muttered sulkily, "I'm not being overprotective. I just don't think that shooting a dragon's breath, which is just a simple mass of mana, will have any effect on it." Anise sighed. "Don't you know that a good child is one who wants to help her parents?" "Parents?" For a moment, Eugene just blinked his eyes, unable to understand what Anise was getting at. Similarly, Sienna also didn't understand what Anise was trying to say. However, Rhaenyra just smiled and laughed awkwardly, as if she still wasn't used to receiving this treatment. "It's just a saying," Anise shrugged before continuing in a low voice. "Hamel, you, I, and the priests of the graceful radiance should all fly together with Mira. Even if we have to face a barrier of black magic and the dark power of destruction, with the holy sword and holy magic on our side, we'll definitely be able to break through." Her words did make sense. So without making any further arguments, Eugene just nodded. Sienna and the other wizards would all focus their firepower together to open up a breach in the Centipede Mountains. Meanwhile, the knights, mercenaries and soldiers would be assigned to intercept the demon folk and demonic beasts. Kiel has its griffin squad, the Knights of the Black Lion have their wyverns, Roar has their own ice wyverns, Shimuan and Yuras both have Pegasi. Leaning against a battlement on top of Sala's palace walls, Melkith muttered to herself as she pointed here and there. "Aroth is the only one that doesn't have anything. Doesn't Aroth use both summons and familiars for the same purpose?" Rhaenys, who had been dragged out here by Melkith, hesitantly pointed out. Upon hearing these words, Melkith narrowed her eyes in a forceful stare and turned to look at Rhaenys. "Do you have any familiars?" "Well, I do have some, but none that can be used for flying," Rhaenys admitted. "Then what are you going to do tomorrow?" Melkith questioned. "The Red Tower Master has offered to lend me a summon," Rhaenys replied. "Lady Melkith." Melkith quickly interrupted. "I told you to call me Big Sis, didn't I?" Big sis. Malkith. Rhynian barely managed to squeeze out each word. Are you going to use a familiar for tomorrow's flight? Do I look like a summoner? I am a spirit summoner. I can fly together with my spirits. That's the method that best suits me, Malkith said as she began to swagger off, shaking her hips. But why had Malkith suddenly started shaking her hips? Since she didn't dare to actually voice that question, Rhynian was forced to come to her own conclusions. Malkith was wearing a fluttery set of clothing that was usually only worn by Nahama's belly dancers. So, could it be that Malkith was attempting something similar to a dance by swaying her hips like this? By the way, as someone who calls herself an archwizard, don't you think that it's a little strange for you to just borrow a summoned creature from the Red Tower Master? Malkith suddenly asked. Rhynian tried to respond, I don't really care. You shouldn't be like that, Malkith immediately argued. After all, this is the moment when you who have always lived in seclusion will truly step out into the world as an archwizard. Moreover, you aren't just making your debut at some academic conference. You're making your debut on the battlefield. Rhynian attempted to convince Malkith once more, but I don't really want to attract so much attention. Malkith continued to speak over her. Don't you intend to become the Green Tower Master? This is your chance to take action and draw everyone's attention so that you can become the Green Tower Master. Rhynian's eyes couldn't help but start to waver as she listened to Malkith's wheedling. Since Generic had abdicated from his position as the Green Tower Master, the position had remained vacant. Since they couldn't afford to just leave the seat empty, Arath needed to quickly elect a new Tower Master. But unfortunately, there were currently no other wizards in the Green Tower of Magic who had managed to reach the 8th circle. But it was also impossible for Arath to temporarily assign a wizard who hadn't yet become an archwizard to the position of Tower Master. It was under these circumstances that Rhynian had arrived in Arath to take part in Sienna's research team. As an archwizard who didn't possess any ties to other nations, Aratha's royal palace and the Council of Tower Masters didn't want to let go of Rhynian. I don't really have any ambitions for the seat of the Tower Master. Also, there's no way that the wizards of the Green Tower of Magic would accept me becoming their Tower Master because I didn't graduate from there, Rhynian pointed out. Even if you don't have any ambitions for it, you can at least try out the position, Malkith cajoled. As for the other wizards in the tower, who cares if they're dissatisfied? As long as you prove yourself worthy of being called an archwizard in the coming battle, they will just have to accept it. Rhynian hesitated. Cho? That's not the problem, I'm telling you that I don't want to. Didn't I say you could just try it out first? Malkith huffed. Malkith wasn't being stubborn for Rhynian's benefit. It was mostly for her self-interest. What a coup it would be if Malkith managed to convince this young and inexperienced junior to join Arath as a Tower Master. Not only that, if Rhynian, whose personality was much more docile compared to the other Magic Tower Masters, became the Green Tower Master, Malkith would be able to keep taking advantage of her for a long time from now. Apart from Malkith and Rhynian, there were a lot of other people standing on top of the palace walls. As Eugene and Gilead walked along the top of the walls together, they kept an eye on what was going on outside the palace walls. It's been a while since I last saw cannons, Eugene commented. The cannons Eugene was talking about weren't the type of cannons that used an explosion of gunpowder to fire a metal shell, but instead cannons that were fired using magic. Since the cannons relied on magic, Eugene had assumed that Aratha's would be the strongest, but Keel's artillery battery also appeared quite formidable. Didn't you have cannons like those in the old days? Gilead asked. Eugene paused to think about it. Well, it wasn't like we didn't have any, but there definitely weren't as many as there are these days. Especially when we advanced deeper into the Devil Dome, there were barely any cannons left in use. Compared to the present day, the battlefields of the past had been lacking in support in every way. While looking at the cannons currently being serviced by the Knights of the White Lion, Eugene tilted his head to the side and asked, "What's with that one over there?" "Our dwarven guests have modified the cannons that were originally in the possession of the Lionheart clan," Gilead explained. Eugene was looking at a cannon whose barrel seemed ridiculously large when compared to the cannons used by the other countries. Seeing how there were bits and pieces stuck all over it, it was clear that the dwarves had added their own artistic embellishments to it. "It seems like it would be a hassle to push that thing along," Eugene observed. Gilead revealed, "Sir Lovelian and the other wizards from the Red Tower of Magic have agreed to cooperate with us in managing our battery of cannons. Could it be that they planned on using summoning magic to move the cannons into place when the time came to fire them? As he imagined this scene occurring, Eugene nodded his head in approval. If they had that much firepower, the ordinary soldiers would be able to remain effective even when facing those stupidly huge demonic beasts. Don't you feel nervous? Eugene asked curiously. I would be lying if I said that I didn't feel any trepidation, Gilead admitted with a wry smile. Gilead didn't want to show any weakness in front of his adopted son, who he saw as no different from his own true children. But although those were Gilead's true feelings, he knew that the man he was currently facing was the reincarnation of the great hero Hamel. So it might leave him with a slightly complex feeling, but Gilead readily admitted his weakness in front of Eugene. A battle of this scale will actually be a first for the Lionhearts. Gilead paused as he realized something. Haha, no, it will actually be a first for everyone here. It's really not all that special. Let me think, how old was I when I first stepped onto the battlefield? I think I was only about 10 years old, but the battle had already finished before I could even come to my senses, Eugene shared as he leaned against the castle wall with a chuckle. Although I don't believe that this kind of advice will be of much use to someone with your personality, Patriarch, even so, well, please don't try to overthink things. And instead of worrying about the lives of your vassals, or anyone else for that matter, make sure to take care of your own life first. Gilead laughed. Ha, that's certainly quite some difficult advice to accept. You're really asking a patriarch like me to only care about his own life instead of the lives of his vassals. It's because I know that you're a good person, Patriarch, so I just hope you don't overly push yourself. If you do die after receiving some kind of injury, what am I supposed to say to Lady Ancilla, Patriarch? Eugene argued. The same goes for me. I know that you're stronger than me, Eugene, and that you have more experience than I do. Yet even so, I am your foster father. And I am also the patriarch of the Lionheart clan, Gilead said, patting Eugene on the shoulder. All of the Lionhearts are my family. My children, the White Lions and the Black Lions, and you as well. I don't want any of my family to get hurt or to die. I also feel the same way, Eugene said with a grin. Down below he had spotted the figures of Cyan and Seal. Seal was riding on Yongyong's back for the first time in a long while. She smiled widely and started waving back when her eyes met with Eugene's. Eugene tried to persuade Gilead one more time. But don't you want to see your children get married before anything else happens? Eugene had said this without giving it much thought, but for a moment, Gilead wondered how he should take those words. After seeing his daughter smile so brightly and waving her hand happily at them, Eugene had started talking about marriage as he kept looking at Seal. Gilead pondered this matter silently. He wanted to ask about Eugene's intentions so strongly that he felt like the words were stuck in his throat. But Gilead also thought that he shouldn't ask Eugene about something like this so directly. So he just cleared his throat and turned his head away to think. Just then he spotted a familiar face approaching them from that direction. Greetings to you, Sir Patriarch and my master, the man said. It was Lehman Schulhoff, who had been taken into service by Eugene in Nahama and now served as Gerhardt's bodyguard. Eugene had thought that Lehman might have abandoned any longings for his home country during his time serving the Lionhearts, but it seemed like the man couldn't help but have some lingering fondness for the country he had been born and raised in. Lehman had acted on his own initiative and confessed his desire to follow Eugene back to Nahama. The supplies sent by the emirs have arrived, Lehman reported. Did they send anything else? Eugene checked. Lehman nodded. Yes, they did. The emir of Salah also sent an assassin squad that he suggested we could use to perform reconnaissance. But what should we do with them? I can't say I'm all that fond of the assassins. Don't you feel the same way? Eugene asked mischievously. Lehman gave a wry smile and nodded. In that case, I will just send them back. Also, the emir of Salah has expressed his intention to hold a banquet for us before we set off. There's no need for that, Eugene snorted. We're leaving tomorrow, so what's the point of having a banquet now? Tell him to prepare a banquet for once everything is over. Yes, my lord, Lehman said with a bow. Being from Nahama, Lehman was familiar with the local culture and language. So even if Eugene just gave him a rough order, Lehman could couch his master's words in the most appropriate terms. Just wait until tomorrow, Eugene thought to himself. Now that things had come this far, he no longer planned to drag out the time. After all, if he continued to procrastinate for no reason, he was just giving the other side more time to prepare. As such, they'd be leaving tomorrow. The Horia Liberation Army would set out from Sala as soon as the sun rose the next morning. But is it really okay to entrust me with that duty? Eugene asked as he glanced over at Gilead. Are you talking about being the flag bearer? Gilead clarified. That's right, Eugene said with a slightly awkward smile. It felt somewhat strange and embarrassing to be entrusted with such an important role. However, Gilead just smiled and patted Eugene on the shoulder once more. If not you, then who else is worthy to carry the Lionheart standard into battle? Aren't there a lot of people other than me who could do it? Eugene argued. After all, there's still you, Patriarch. There's also Cyan, the next Patriarch in line. Finally, there's Lady Carmen, and if you don't think she's suitable, there's Gargith, who has the largest body in all of the Black Lions. He would be sure to stand out while holding the standard aloft. To answer his question, Gilead's finger pointed to the outside of the palace walls as he said, all of these people? Below the walls, there were countless people running around, preparing for the next day's expedition. There were also various different flags waving in the desert wind. The flag of Kiel, the flag of Uraz, the flag of Ruhr, the flag of Shimuan, and the flag of Arath. Apart from these countries, each of the various mercenary corps and knightly orders also had their own flags. They've all gathered here because of you, Gilead finished. Even without me having called them together, I'm sure they would have volunteered to come together for a problem like this, Eugene feebly insisted. How would that really be the case? Eugene, do you really believe that? Gilead asked with a smile. Honestly speaking, neither of them believed that Kiel would have really taken part if not for Eugene. Even if Alcester had wanted to go on the expedition, the Emperor would not have given him permission to do so. The same went for Shimuan and the Zoran tribe. If Sienna had been absent, Arath probably wouldn't have come either. Even so, Uraz would surely have come. Since it dares to call itself the Holy Empire, it couldn't afford to stay out of something like this, Eugene thought consideringly. Ruhr, which had always followed the example set by Molen, would have also taken part. But as for the Knights Errant and the Mercenary Corps? In the end, Eugene couldn't help but let out a deep sigh. Just like Gilead had said, the reason that the Horia Liberation Army had been able to be organized on such a large scale was all due to Eugene's presence here. They were all gathered here because of all the relationships that Eugene had accumulated over his 23 years of life. Finally, Eugene was left with no choice but to nod with another sigh. It feels like you're putting too much weight on my shoulders, Eugene complained. Isn't that just what being a hero means? Gilead pointed out with a mischievous smile. I might not know much about what the life of a hero is like, but you should be very familiar with it, no? Ahem, Eugene awkwardly coughed. Eugene felt so embarrassed that he couldn't even put up his usual show of arrogance. While clearing his throat, Eugene distractedly scrubbed the floor with the end of his shoe. Seeing Eugene lower his gaze, unable to say anything in response, Gilead lowered his hand from Eugene's shoulder with a chuckle. He changed the subject. Well then, I need to head down now to help with the preparations for the expedition. Eugene was about to volunteer. I'll also go with. It's fine. You don't need to help out. As the patriarch of the family, I'm the one who should take care of troublesome tasks like this, Gilead reassured him. In this coming battle, there was no way that Gilead would be playing the main role. Gilead was all too aware of this fact. So the best thing he could do for now was organize the armaments of Lionheart's knightly orders and coordinate plans with the other forces. He needed to assist Eugene so that he could keep looking forward without having to look back. I'm just afraid that I won't be able to open up the way forward for you, Eugene, Gilead admitted to himself. But in that case he should, at the very least, be fully prepared to run down the path that Eugene would be opening up for them. Eugene kept his eyes on Gilead's back as the patriarch leaped down from the palace walls. The words, "You don't need to help out," were lingering in his ears. Feeling slightly embarrassed by Gilead's consideration for him, Eugene eventually turned around. The sun had slowly begun to set. Eugene didn't want to attract needless attention, so he looked for somewhere deserted. Since he needed to turn in early to rest in preparation for the expedition tomorrow, Eugene decided that it would be better to double-check all of his equipment just one more time. Although it was a long way from Sala to Horia, with the assistance of all of the high-ranking wizards and the spirit summoners led by Melkith, let alone a few days of travel, they would be able to reach Horia in less than a day. Then the battle should break out immediately, Eugene suspected. There was no way that the forces led by the Spectre would just quietly shut themselves in the city and focus on defending. There should already be enemies waiting in ambush outside of the Centipede Mountains. So right now would be the last chance that Eugene would get to prepare for battle with peace of mind. After he climbed down from the palace walls, many people noticed Eugene. Whenever they did, they would all try to greet him or ask where he was going. Since they weren't someone he could just ignore, Eugene returned each of their greetings and gave a casual answer to their questions. The emotions contained in the looks that they gave him were, for the most part, similar. There was respect, envy, admiration, and other such feelings. In the past, such gazes felt heavy, Eugene recalled thoughtfully. As far as Eugene could remember, the first time he had drawn such looks was in the Samar rainforest. These were the types of looks that only a hero could draw. At that time, their eyes had felt heavy resting on him. It felt burdensome. 300 years ago, Eugene might have already been a hero, but he wasn't the hero. Back then, most of those gazes had been directed at Vermouth, with only a few being turned towards Hamel. I hate being the hero. Eugene could remember Vermouth saying that. They had all called him the hero and they all had expectations for him. During that time, back 300 years ago, Vermouth would always attract attention wherever he went and was treated like the protagonist at every moment. They would all beg him to defeat the Demon Kings, ask him to save the world, and plead with him to avenge their fallen kin. Those were the types of words that Vermouth was always forced to listen to, all while receiving their admiration, envy, awe, and other such emotions. It was just like what Eugene was experiencing now. But does it still feel as heavy as it first did? Eugene asked himself. That was no longer the case. Rather than feeling heavy, all of their attention just felt slightly embarrassing. To be honest now, it had even become familiar and natural for him to receive such treatment. Can I really do it? Eugene no longer had such doubts. Rather than questioning himself on whether he could live up to their expectations, he had decided that it was better to just believe that he would do what he had to. Eugene had spent quite some time walking. It was only then that he finally arrived at a place where there were no other people around. After scanning his surroundings, Eugene pushed his hands inside his cloak. His hands came out, each holding the Moonlight Sword and the Holy Sword. Those were the only two swords that he pulled out. The Holy Sword was just the same as ever. Nothing had changed about it. The God of Light who had placed a connection to himself within this sword was someone whose intentions and identity seemed inscrutable to Eugene. However, Eugene was confident that in this coming battle, the Holy Sword would provide its light whenever he needed it. People who belonged to other religions often said that the God of Light was self-righteous. Even in Eugene's opinion, that did indeed seem to be the case. When even the believers who served the God of Light were already so self-righteous and fanatics at that, then the God of Light should be even more self-righteous than his millions of believers. He was so self-righteous that he had even lent his strength to Eugene as Eugene was killing the faithful believers who had devoted themselves to the God. Then there was the Moonlight Sword. Can I really use you? Eugene silently asked. After killing Iris, the Moonlight Sword had received new sources of strength. Eugene's mana and divine power had been infused within it, but so had the same ominousness that was ever present in Lehanjar. This would be Eugene's first time using the Moonlight Sword in actual combat after the blade of the sword had been fully restored. So, would the Moonlight Sword really be able to cut down the fake who had become the incarnation of destruction? Eugene couldn't help but feel some concern about the likelihood of that. The Moonlight Sword was a sword of destruction. The ominous moonlight that sprayed out each time the sword was swung was essentially no different from the dark power of destruction. Even with my divine power and mana added onto it, Eugene clicked his tongue as he glared down at the blade of the Moonlight Sword. He would just have to test it out himself to find out whether the current Moonlight Sword would have any effect against the incarnation of destruction. In fact, there was something more important than that. Will my divine sword be able to cut him down? Eugene silently speculated. If he couldn't even cut someone like the Spectre with his divine sword, then Eugene would never be able to take down the Demon King of Destruction himself. So what if his divine sword hadn't been completely formed yet? So what if he was lacking in divine power? If Eugene kept thinking up these questions one by one and preparing all sorts of excuses, then even decades wouldn't be enough to prepare him to face the final Demon King. Eugene rubbed the part of his chest over where the divine sword was drawn from. He suddenly turned his head. The sun was still setting. The golden desert had been dyed a dark red. From the other side of the desert, dusk was slowly creeping up. Before too much time had passed, the sun would completely set and disappear, and this dark red desert would be covered in pitch-black darkness. Someone's figure could be seen floating above the dark waves of dusk that seemed to have foreshadowed his arrival. It was a man wearing a white mask. Eugene's hand dug into his chest. Chapter 468, Horia 3. Bonus images. Who was this guy? What was he doing here? Apart from those questions, there was a mountain of other suspicious points that deserved questioning. However, Eugene wasn't curious about any of those details and didn't have anything to ask this figure. Because Eugene was experiencing a state of emotion so pure that it was much higher in terms of precedence and importance than anything else going through his mind. Eugene just wanted to kill him. This sole emotion drove Eugene to break into a run. This single-minded and intense killing intent also led him to place one hand on his heart. The fingers of his hand wrapped around the hilt of the divine sword, clenching so tightly that the veins on the back of his hand bulged out. A thought suddenly flashed through Eugene's head. No, hold on. Reason floated to the surface from within the surging river of killing intent. Eugene's hot head cooled down as if ice water had been poured onto it. He hit the brakes on his speeding body. His right hand was still holding on tightly to the hilt of his divine sword, but he had yet to draw the blade. Phew, Eugene took in a deep breath before slowly exhaling. Eugene was focused on calming the murderous intent boiling within him. Now that he had put the brakes back on, his sense of reason grew even stronger. He needed to think of something. Anything. Something other than the thought of killing the person in front of him. I don't think that you've come here to be killed by me, Eugene eventually said. This wasn't an opponent so insignificant that Eugene could kill him with just one swing of his divine sword. Eugene had already acknowledged this fact. But even though he didn't really want to fight the specter here if he had to, then it couldn't be helped. From what I've heard, you have a talent for suddenly appearing and disappearing. And even if your head is chopped off and your body broken into pieces, you somehow still manage to survive, Eugene observed curiously. Agaroth or Eugene's divine sword could even manage to slay demon kings. That had been an indisputable fact during the mythological era. And now in the present era, when Iris had become the new demon king of fury, Eugene had ended her life with the sword. However, would it really have been possible for him to kill Iris if she had been in perfect condition with just one swing of the divine sword? The divine sword might be strong, but Eugene wasn't going to overestimate its power. He had always been cautious in matters like this, even during his time as Hamel. He would always assume the worst when it came to battles. It was only by preparing for the worst-case scenario that he could deal with anything unexpected. Just what are you? Eugene demanded. If Eugene swung the divine sword at the specter, would he be able to kill the man right here and now? He should be able to deal at least some damage. However, the problem of whether he would be able to reliably ensure the specter's death after that first blow was a matter that required careful consideration. The divine sword was different from the moonlight sword or the holy sword. Whenever Eugene swung the divine sword, it consumed a part of his divine power. His divine power might have increased tremendously compared to when he had first drawn the divine sword. But drawing the divine sword still placed a heavy burden on Eugene. So if he ended up unable to use the divine sword to its full potential at a critical moment because he swung it here today, that would be a stupid thing to do, Eugene thought as he held back his urge to attack. There was also a strategic reason for not using the divine sword. This bastard doesn't know about the divine sword, Eugene reminded himself. So if he couldn't kill this guy here and now, it would be better not to show him the divine sword in the first place. The specter had been busy staring at Eugene but suddenly said, "How unexpected." He measured the distance between Eugene and himself. They weren't all that far apart. It was a distance that would only take 1/100th of a second for Eugene to cross if he were to try and take the specter's head. The specter had predicted that Eugene would immediately rush over to him to slice off his head. He had even thought about allowing it to happen. But Eugene hadn't done so. So why had he stopped? The specter had felt Eugene's killing intent wash over him the moment that their eyes had met. The killing intents of Gavid Lindman, Molen Roar, and Sienna Meridian had been impressive, but Hamel or Eugene Lionheart's was on a different level. Eugene was the only one who could muster up such a single-minded and violent killing intent. So when that killing intent suddenly disappeared, the specter had to wonder whether he was dealing with the real Eugene or a fake. No, this really is like you, the specter corrected himself. The specter hadn't expected Eugene to suddenly stop like that. But that just proved he had been thinking too simply. If it was Eugene or Hamel, then the right thing to do was to stop there. As the specter realized this, he smiled wryly. He hadn't understood what Eugene was doing right away and had had to give it a bit more thought to put himself into Eugene's shoes. All of that just seemed to prove to the specter that he was just a fake. How difficult, Eugene muttered. The specter's face couldn't be seen because of his mask. However, Eugene could easily imagine the face hidden behind the mask and even vividly picture what kind of expression he must be showing through the specter's downcast voice. It's so difficult to resist the feeling of wanting to kill someone, Eugene sighed to himself. It felt like his insides were boiling. Far too many thoughts were roiling inside of his head. The sound of Molin's confused voice. The sight of Black Lion Castle left in shambles. The scene of the forest after all the trees were swept away. The cries of the wounded soldiers. The smell of blood. The groans that leaked out not because of the agony they might be feeling, but because they couldn't stand the rage welling up within them. Eugene took a few deep breaths to calm his emotions. His face, which had carried an expression of murderous rage, was wiped clean. With eyes that were as cold as ice, Eugene glared at the specter. "Why haven't you answered my question?" Eugene demanded. "It's hard to know what I should say," the specter confessed. "In that case, allow me to provide an answer myself. You're an asshole, a son of a bitch, and a fake." "Is that enough of a description?" Eugene said angrily. Instead of saying anything in response, the specter just chuckled. Since the original had already voiced the truth like that, what was the point in trying to refute him? The specter had no desire to even try denying Eugene's words. Eugene voiced his doubts. "You just what on earth is that you want to do? Why get up to such bullshit in a city that doesn't even belong to you?" "Because it's necessary," the specter claimed. "Necessary for you? Or perhaps for me?" Eugene pressed, his eyes narrowed. Eugene already knew this bastard might be hypocritically claiming to do all this for his sake. "I guess you could say that this is something that we all need," the specter hummed and replied. "That's just something that you went and decided on your own," Eugene argued, his head tilted to the side in question. "I know that you've got a lot of things causing you distress. I also know that your situation must be shitty and confusing." The specter's personality was created from the fragments of memories left behind in Hamel's corpse. Those memories had then been manipulated to make him easier to use. That was how the specter had been born, with Hamel's memories, along with Hamel's personality. At the same time, he held hatred and a desire for revenge aimed at Vermouth, Molin, Sienna, and Anise. He initially had no awareness of the fact that he was a fake, but he had suddenly come to that realization in Revesta. After going through a lot of agonizing doubts about who he was and why a fake like him even existed in the end. "If it were me," Eugene said slowly, imagining what he would do if he were the fake, "I would probably act in the real me's best interest. Or at least that's what I think I would do if I were the fake. Because no matter how much I make a fuss about it, there's no way I could become the real deal. Even more so if the real me was alive and hadn't died yet." But that was exactly why Eugene couldn't understand this current situation. "You said that all of this is necessary for all of us, but I just can't comprehend that. If I were you, I wouldn't do this," Eugene stated firmly. He understood why the specter would go looking for Molin, but then the specter had gone on to attack the Black Lion Castle. Eugene couldn't understand why the specter had felt the need to attack the Lionhearts, Eugene's family. He said that he had come there to bring them rage, right? Fine, the specter's attack did have that effect. However, if that really was his goal, then there were other methods that he could have used. Instead of using a way that Eugene would never have used, the specter could have used a means that Hamel might have. "The reason you can't understand is that you aren't me," the specter said while shaking his head. "I admire and respect you, and I also can't help but imagine what it would be like if I were you. However, as the real thing, there's no need for you to do the same to me. Isn't that right?" Eugene remained silent. "You said you wouldn't do what I did if you were me? I already know that. I also had that same thought, that if it were you, you wouldn't do this. If it were you, you would despise this kind of behavior," the specter added. There was no way that the specter wouldn't be able to tell that he was doing something that Hamel would never do. "That is exactly why I did it," the specter explained. "Even while knowing all that," the specter continued, "because by doing so, I was doing something that only I would do." Eugene glared at the specter without saying a word. He didn't feel any need to question the specter's explanation. He instinctively knew it was the truth. The instinctive feelings currently growing inside Eugene were so strong that they could even compare to the intuition brought about by divine power. "That thing looks like me. But it is not the same as me. It resembles me, but it is different. That is why I have no choice but to kill him." "Why have you come here?" Eugene demanded once more. "Before I kill you," the specter said with a wry smile and a tilt of his head, "I wanted to meet with you one last time, and have a good talk. Because a lot has changed since we last met in the rainforest." "You're right. A lot has changed," Eugene agreed. "It's strange to say this, but at that time, you were actually more similar to me than you are now." What would it have felt like if the specter had heard those words when he first realized he was just a fake copy in Revesta? Before he had been recognized as a warrior by Molan, before he had seen Sienna smiling happily as she picked out clothes and a ring, before he had learned the truth from the demon king of incarceration. If he had heard those words back then, perhaps they would have instilled greed within me that doesn't have a right to exist, the specter speculated as he raised his hand and pointed to Horia in the distance. "I will be waiting for you in the palace," the specter declared. "There will be many things blocking your way. But, even if you don't manage to make it there, I will not move from my throne. The road to the palace will be arduous, though I don't really imagine that you will fall before managing to reach the end." The specter then turned to look somewhere other than Horia. His gaze was now focused on what lay behind Eugene. Although they were quite some distance away, the specter could see each of the flags waving over the various forces' camps. "A lot of the people who have gathered under your name will perish. Are you prepared for that?" the specter warned. "From now on you're a demon king," Eugene finally spat out. "It's fine if you don't have a real name. In fact, it doesn't really matter whether or not you really are a demon king. Because no matter what, I will treat you as a demon king. Your actions are similar, so it would be strange to think of you as anything other than a demon king." The specter was terrifyingly strong and couldn't be killed easily. He had demon folks, black wizards and demonic beasts under his command. He had captured a city, taken it as his territory, and was now waiting in his castle for Eugene. "I am the hero," Eugene said as he released the hand that had been clutching his chest. Instead, Eugene drew the holy sword as he continued speaking. "All of those following me are warriors willing to sacrifice their lives to kill you, a demon king." The specter realized his question had been unnecessary. But that said, he still felt like it had been a good idea to ask it. Having heard such a response, the specter would no longer hesitate. He didn't think of himself as a demon king. He thought it was ridiculous to call himself a demon king when he really wasn't one. However, now that Eugene had said such words, the specter had no choice but to become a demon king. "Then I will be waiting for you in my demon king's castle," the specter said with a grin as he turned around. Tomorrow Eugene Lionheart would be coming for him. A hero would be leading a group of warriors to fight him. Since a hero would be doing something worthy of a hero, a demon king should just do what a demon king did. So this demon king would do his best to block the way of the hero and then kill him once the hero arrived. "If you aren't able to kill me," the specter thought. If Eugene was weaker than him, then it is only right for the world to end here. Those were the specter's last thoughts before he disappeared from right in front of Eugene. For a few moments, Eugene just stared at the place where the specter had disappeared. Then he looked at the distant Horia, as well as the black centipede mountains that surrounded the capital city and the ominous gray sky above it. "Are you all right?" Eugene asked as he pushed his hand inside his cloak. Mare and Rhaenyra, who had been left trembling in fear, hurriedly grabbed Eugene's hand from either side. Eugene grinned at the cute and clingy touch of their hands as he spun around. "That bastard. If he's going to wear a mask, then there are a lot of other masks that he could use. Why that one? It's way too pale," Eugene complained. Who could that specter resemble to have such a strange sense of style? Eugene clicked his tongue as his feet made their way back towards the camp. The sun set and the day turned into night. After a night filled with countless twinkling stars, it was the moon's turn to set. Dawn had arrived. As the light melted into the darkness of the night sky, the starlight faded and slowly dissipated. The camps outside of the palace walls had been dismantled by dawn. Preparations for the expedition had also been completed. 2 types of wyverns, Normal wyverns of the lion hearts and ice wyverns of roar, griffins, pegasi, familiars and summoned creatures all flew up into the sky. The knights left on the ground mounted their horses. Even the infantry who didn't have horses weren't being forced to walk to Horia. The wizards of the Red Tower of Magic summoned huge creatures for the infantry to ride, while the spirit summoners of the White Tower of Magic also summoned earth spirits to provide their own mode of faster travel. Even as dawn broke, the skies above Horia were still dark. Everyone who had gathered in the name of the Liberation Army strengthened their resolve as they looked towards Horia. Eugene silently climbed to the top of the palace walls. He hadn't said anything. He hadn't even made a sound. However, everyone turned to look at Eugene. As if they had been waiting for this moment, they all let out an excited cry as Eugene's gaze swept over them. Although the sound of hundreds of wings flapping at the same time that was coming from the flying squadrons was unavoidably noisy, no one made any unnecessary sounds as they all turned their ears towards Eugene. Right now, Eugene was at the center of everyone's attention. "This is a bit embarrassing," Eugene muttered with a grin. But he couldn't say that it felt burdensome. His small mutter was heard by everyone standing beneath the palace walls. Those who knew Eugene well also grinned and laughed just like Eugene was. However, there was an overwhelmingly larger number of people here who didn't know Eugene all that well. So instead of laughing, they just looked up at Eugene with even more serious expressions. Eugene climbed onto the battlements of the palace walls. Although it was only a little higher, his field of view seemed to have opened up hugely. He could see everything clearly, including what had been hidden by the tall battlements, the view of what lay beneath the walls. He saw everyone who was serving as the commander of each nation's army. They were all people that Eugene had met during the short meeting yesterday. On top of that, he also saw Sienna and Christina. Instead of addressing them directly, Eugene just crooked his finger towards the two. At this gesture, Sienna grinned and pulled out her staff while Christina unfurled her wings of light. "Although it's a bit late at this point, there is something that I want to say," Eugene announced. The sage and the saint flew up to the top of the palace walls to stand next to Eugene. "If you don't want to die or are afraid of dying, or if you're worried about who's going to provide for your family if you're gone, if there are any here with such circumstances, it's all right for you to excuse yourself from this expedition," Eugene generously offered. A few people laughed, but that was all the reaction that Eugene's words got. There wasn't anything like any dissatisfied murmuring with an undertone of agitation. Eugene nodded. Indeed, if there was anyone who didn't want to take part, then they should have already run away by now. He was very familiar with the looks on their faces and in their eyes. Eugene had seen it more than a few times 300 years ago. While unconsciously smiling, Eugene pushed one hand inside his cloak. "I," Eugene began as he drew out the holy sword, "am the hero chosen by the god of light." He embedded the tip of the sword down into the battlement at his feet. Riding the giant Pegasus Apollo, Raphael led an excited cheer. The holy knights, the priests of the luminous covenant, and the priests of the graceful radiance were gathered around Raphael, and they all looked up at Eugene with tears in their eyes. After releasing the hilt of the holy sword, Eugene's hand reached into his cloak once more. "I am also a descendant of the great Vermouth," Eugene said as he pulled out a large standard from within his cloak. When the standard was erected, its flag was caught by the wind and began to flap loudly. This was the standard of the Lion Hearts. As the flag flapped in the air, the lion's mane depicted on the flag seemed to be fluttering. "I am Eugene Lionheart," Eugene proudly declared. The dawn grew even brighter. Rays of light fell and bathed both Eugene and the standard of the Lionheart clan. Everyone who was looking up at him felt dazzled by this sight. However, no one could bear to turn their gaze away. Standing in the center of this eye-piercing light, Eugene unknowingly erased one of the many names used to describe him from everyone's minds. He had once been called the Second Coming of the Great Vermouth, but now? No, Gilead thought as he unconsciously laid a hand on his left chest. The Lionheart sigil was embroidered there, the same image of a lion that was depicted on the flag. Gilead wasn't the only one who placed their hand over their hearts, touching the Lionheart sigil. Both the White Lions and the Black Lions, as well as everyone who belonged to the Lionheart clan, all placed their hands on their hearts as they looked up at Eugene. Everyone had realized the same thing. He isn't the Second Coming of the Great Vermouth. They couldn't call Eugene by that name any longer. He was great, wise, faithful, brave, and stupid. The radiant Eugene Lionheart. Carmen muttered. Eugene propped the Lionheart standard onto one shoulder and said to his awed audience, "Now then, let's go and kill ourselves a demon king." Rhaenyra disappeared from inside his cloak. She had been transported high into the sky through a spatial leap and was now wrapped in light. Whoosh! A huge black dragon unfurled its wings in Rhaenyra's place. The airborne squadrons flying in the sky didn't panic at her sudden appearance and immediately pulled on their reins to open up a path through the sky. Flapping her wings, the dragon flew down and lowered her head towards Eugene. "Wasn't that a bit too flashy?" Eugene commented. "There's no way I could lose to your magnificence, benefactor," Rhaenyra answered in a spirited tone. Eugene was caught off guard by her response, but responding to the expectant gazes of those around him, he climbed on top of Rhaenyra's head. A loud cheer erupted from the crowds below. Chapter 469, Horia 4. With her wings outspread, the black dragon took the lead, followed by the hundreds of wyverns, griffins, pegasi and flying summoned creatures. Below, the rest of the army rode forth on their other means of transportation, such as their war horses, summoned creatures, earth spirits and chariots. The leader of the White Dragon Knights, Alcester, looked up into the sky as he rode on the back of his own barred steed. He was looking up at the daughter of Rhyzakia, the demonic dragon whose name had become infamous starting from the era of war. Alcester didn't know what exactly was going on between Rhaenyra and Eugene. However, to Alcester, who was unaware of the true circumstances, the current sight above him felt both extremely awe-inspiring and symbolic. This was a child of the demon dragon Rhyzakia, but she had been influenced by the hero and had now lent her wings for the sake of protecting the world. According to what had been passed down through legend, dragons were both proud and arrogant. But such a dragon was not only carrying the hero on her back, she had also allowed dozens of other humans to ride along as well. As for the army that was following the dragon, this awesome and majestic sight at their head sent thrills down the spines of the entire Horia Liberation Army. Regardless of whether the upcoming battle was won or lost, everything that happened here would be recorded in legend. And as time went by, their story would eventually become a myth. So, all those present here were now a part of those legends and myths. And the one that all of the legends would be written about. The protagonist of their story that would become part of the legends and myths. Everyone in the Liberation Army was thinking of that hero's name. The radiant Eugene Lionheart, Carmen muttered once more. That was the name she had unconsciously muttered when she first saw Eugene holding up the standard on the palace wall. Although that name had only been spoken in Carmen's murmurs to herself, once this war had ended, if Eugene defeated the unnamed demon king who had taken over Horia City, then everyone would end up calling Eugene by that name. Carmen would make sure that it happened. He was the continuation of the legend from 300 years ago, a descendant of the Great Vermouth. The brilliant Eugene Lionheart, Carmen muttered with a cheerful smile. Although her words were muttered in a low voice, the sound still managed to reach the ears of the black lions flying around her. "It seems like she's really taken with that name," Desra subtly leaned closer to Seal and whispered. Unlike in the past, Desra now seemed accustomed to riding on a wyvern's back. Seal's eyes were boring holes into Rhaenyra's back. She pouted at Desra's quiet jibe and said, "You have to admit that he did look radiant." She recalled the sight of his figure standing tall with the light of dawn at his back, the Lionheart standard fluttering beside him. Seal unknowingly had to take a deep breath to calm herself. Her face felt flushed and hot. What a severe case of lovesickness, Desra thought as she clicked her tongue. Seeing Seal shake her head from side to side while clutching her red face caused Desra to feel a mixture of distressed emotions. Her distress came from the fact this sight brought back memories of Shimuin and the appearance of Seal crying through her swollen eyes. "How about you fly a little closer?" A deep voice suddenly sounded from nearby. The speaker was Gargith with his bulging muscles. Because his bulk was so large, the wyvern he was riding seemed smaller in comparison. "It's fine," Seal responded. Gargith tried to persuade her, but Lady Seal. "I said it's fine, so don't say anything you don't need to," Seal ordered. Right now it was still better for her to keep this distance. As she had this thought, Seal raised her hands and slapped her cheeks. A tingling pain ran over her cheeks, which were still flushed with heat before the wind from their flight cooled her skin. "You're not ready yet," Seal told herself. If she went over to him without having any confidence in herself or having finished the necessary preparations, she might just end up giving in to her greed to be with him. Seal wanted to stand proudly at his side on her own merit, and she didn't want to cause Eugene any embarrassment. Sir Eugene, Raphael flew closer to Eugene on his steed Apollo, a huge Pegasus with 2 pairs of wings. If you would grant me permission, I would like to fly ahead of the army to scout. Raphael was wearing a heavy suit of armor that didn't seem to match well with his boyish appearance. However, the uniquely world-weary air that clung to him actually made his choice of outfit seem natural. There's no need for that, Eugene assured him. The 2 pairs of wings and gigantic physique possessed by Raphael's trusty steed Apollo were not innate to the beast. Apollo was a holy hybrid created through a combination of crossbreeding, magical biology and holy magic. All the Pegasi in Ura's holy beast cavalry, who were currently flying along behind Eugene, were also holy hybrids. Therefore, the Pegasi of Ura's holy beast cavalry were much stronger and faster than that of Shimuan's heavenly beast cavalry. In fact, among all the squadrons currently flying through the air around them, no other flying creature was faster than a Pegasus from the holy beast cavalry. However, they still couldn't be faster than one of Sienna's spells. I'm grateful that you have volunteered on your own initiative, Lord Raphael, but the area ahead is already being scouted through the use of Lady Sienna's spells, Eugene explained. All right, I understand, Raphael said with a nod as he pulled on Apollo's reins. Raphael didn't feel so strongly about his offer to help that he would stubbornly insist on going ahead with it no matter what, and he didn't need any empty flattery from Eugene either. There was only one thing that the Crusader desired. Raphael had wholeheartedly devoted himself, body and soul, to serving the light. The same goes for all of you as well, Raphael thought as he looked at the dozens of priests kneeling behind Eugene. Each of these priests had been carefully chosen by the saint herself from the Luminous Covenant, where they had previously been implanted with sacred relics or artificial miracles and turned into holy weapons. After they were picked to join the graceful Radiance, these priests then received renewed instruction in holy magic and were given combat training by Raphael. Then from this group the most outstanding dozen or so had now been selected once more and had been entrusted with the duty of guarding Eugene's back. If any danger does come looking for Sir Eugene, Raphael narrowed his eyes at his former students. They would need to protect Eugene even if it meant offering up their own life to the light. During the past year Raphael had spent instructing them, the most important thing he had imparted to them was the spirit of dedication. In the first place, the Graceful Radiance was a suicide squad that had been put together for the sole purpose of martyring themselves in the coming battles against the Demon Kings. I really hate that kind of thing, Eugene said with a sour expression once Raphael had left them. At first I thought that they were just battlefield priests who had received advanced training to serve as a special unit that directly assisted the saint. Or at least that's what you told me. We're not all that different, Anise replied to Eugene in place of Christina. After the events at the Fount of Light, any relics and sacred weapons belonging to the Malficarum that could be safely disposed of were taken care of. However, that still left the living biological weapons the Inquisition had created, and as living beings, they couldn't just be disposed of like inanimate weapons, could they? Eugene also thought there wasn't any need to resort to such drastic measures. However, he had never expected that they would be repurposed into a suicide squad. The purpose of the Graceful Radiance's existence is to serve me, the saint. And the reason for my existence is to serve and protect you, the hero, Anise extrapolated. There were many ears currently listening in. So Anise didn't try to persuade Eugene with a long argument. She also didn't feel like there was any need to do so. Suicide Squad was a new term that had only come into use in the past 300 years. During the war, there was no need for such a term because everyone who had entered the Devildom had been prepared to sacrifice their lives for the mission. Eugene was also aware of all this. When fighting against the Demon Kings, it was only natural to accept the likelihood of death. However, wasn't there a difference between being ready to accept death and setting your death as the sole purpose of your entire existence? I just think that being prepared to die and setting your own death as your ultimate goal are two very different things, Eugene tried to argue. In the end, whatever the case might be, it just means that they won't run away in the face of death, not run towards it. Sir Hero, you should already know far too well just how terrible our enemies, the Demon Kings, are, Anise said while staring at Eugene with a calm and relaxed gaze. But Eugene could sense just how many complex emotions there were swirling in the depths of those eyes. No, there wasn't even a need to try and sense it. That was just how well Eugene knew the woman named Anise Slywood. I know, Eugene gravely responded. The one who was feeling the most pain due to their circumstances was Anise, who had been the one to carefully select the members of the Graceful Radiance. As such, Eugene didn't lay any of the blame for their mission on Anise. However, what I'm trying to say is that I hope there can be as few deaths as possible, Eugene insisted. You're quite the greedy person, Sir Hero. When you say things like that, it makes me slightly concerned that you might be taking the weight of your own life far too lightly, Anise whispered back with a sly grin. No matter what he said in response, he would end up being scolded. So Eugene just cleared his throat and avoided meeting her eyes. I've finished the scan, Sienna suddenly spoke up. She had been concentrating with her eyes closed while standing atop Rhaenyra's head. Although there was strong interference from the high density of dark power that awaited in front of them, Sienna's absolute decree had managed to pierce through enemy lines to see what lay ahead. There are almost no life signs anywhere in the city. However, there is still a lot of movement being detected. You know what that means, right? Sienna asked with a grave look on her face. The undead, Eugene provided the answer with a furrowed brow. Amelia Merwin is the most masterful and powerful necromancer among all the black wizards who have ever existed throughout history, Balzac chimed in. He had been standing among the arch-wizards gathered behind Sienna. Even though most of Horia's citizens were expelled, the number of corpses that were left behind by those who were caught in clash during the siege of the city must have numbered in the hundreds. If she raised the corpses in the city's cemeteries as well, she may have formed a literal army of the undead. The older the corpses, the weaker they are, so there's no need to worry about the ones raised from the cemeteries, Sienna said with a snort. No matter how many ghouls or skeletons were stumbling around within the city, Sienna could sweep them all away with a single spell. The only truly tricky and troublesome opponents to deal with were the high-ranking undead. I can barely feel any life signs coming from the black wizards, Sienna added with a frown. It seems that they've made quite the drastic choice, Balzac muttered, the lenses of his glasses glinting as he pushed them back up his nose. 1. I don't believe there is any chance that the black wizards would abandon their advantage of having a secure base and leave the city to create a distraction. Yet even so, the fact that barely any life signs can be felt coming from them, that must mean that most of the black wizards are already dead. Now that things had come to this, purging the black wizards brought Amelia no benefits, so that meant liches, Eugene spat out with a twisted scowl. His disgust was due to the fact that he didn't have even a single good memory associated with liches. Liches were undead created from dead black wizards. Once a black wizard was transformed into a lich, they would gain great power and could not be put down unless their life vessel was destroyed. Of course, becoming a lich didn't just come with only benefits. Even if one were transformed into a lich, most of one's human desires would still remain, so one would be forced to suffer from never being able to satisfy one's hunger and thirst. Also, it was said that if the lich's life vessel was destroyed, they would never be able to reincarnate and would be forced to suffer in hell for the rest of their existence. What about the demon folk? Eugene inquired. I think they're all gathered over by the royal palace. As for the demonic beasts, they seem to be outside. Sienna paused, her nose wrinkling in surprise. After being silent for a few moments, Sienna let out a snort. She had yet to meet Amelia in person, but how could there be such a crazy bitch? Sienna said with complete sincerity. Outside the Centipede Mountains, something huge was rising out of the desert. Sienna was immediately able to recognize what this giant figure was. She immediately transmitted what she had just seen to Eugene. The giant figure was one of Fury's adopted children, Camash, the chieftain of the giants. Eugene also let out a snort as he nodded in agreement with Sienna. She really is one crazy bitch. As Camash rose out of the sand, spreading out from the center of his feet, the desert began to turn black. It was from this blackened sand that the demonic beasts began to rise. Although they couldn't be compared to the Centipede Mountains or Camash, the demonic beasts were all large creatures that could tower over ordinary humans. On top of that, even the large army of undead that had just been roaming the city now reappeared in the desert. Eugene reopened his eyes that he had closed while receiving the image from Sienna. Then he slowly walked over to stand next to Sienna. There was no longer any need to keep up the image transmission spell as Horia was slowly drawing nearer. In the distance, Eugene spotted the figure of Camash just standing there quietly. The flying squadrons following Rhaenyra also noticed Kamash's giant figure and relayed the information behind to the ground troops. Everyone couldn't help but be shaken by the news that a giant had suddenly appeared ahead of them. Giants were just as rarely seen as elves. The giants who didn't join the Demon King's side during the war had gone into hiding out of guilt or fear that they would be forced into a murderous rampage due to public persecution. All other giants were now living in small groups within the forest that had been granted to them in Helmuth. That is the giant that Vermouth and Hamel killed 300 years ago. Sienna's voice was able to reach every member of the agitated army. Just from her words alone, everyone was able to recall the name of this giant. This was Kamash, the largest and strongest giant in all of history. Kaya! Melkith screamed in excitement at the sight of the gigantic Kamash. The spirit summoners of the White Tower of Magic who were following her were frightened by her outburst and immediately tried to restrain her. But Melkith shook off all of their attempts and flew up into the sky. Sister, allow me to take him down, Melkith offered. Apart from the wise Sienna, there was still the question of who exactly was the strongest wizard among all the wizards of this era. Melkith thought that this undead giant was the best opponent to prove and publicize the fact that the answer to that question was herself. If she proved herself by slaying Kamash, she might be able to bring the other towers of magic under the leadership of the White Tower of Magic and thus monopolize their research funding. Though in fact, rather than her ambitions for the White Tower of Magic, she was more motivated by her personal desire to show off the power she had gained from contracting 3 spirit kings. Eugene was the one to reject Melkith. No way. While stretching his neck from side to side and shaking his wrists, Eugene added, I have to be the one to kill that giant. What? Why? Melkith yelped in protest. Eugene paused and thought. That thing was brought back to life because the founder of our clan didn't finish him off properly, right? As such, I should be the one to finish things with him. 300 years ago they had killed Kamash, but they hadn't done anything to his body. They could never have expected that his corpse would disappear from the battlefield or that 300 years later, Kamash would reappear right in front of them as an undead. Eugene had no sympathy for Kamash, who had been raised as an undead. In the first place, Eugene and Kamash had never even exchanged a single meaningful conversation. Their only history together was when Kamash had shown up leading a group of giants under his command and blocked Vermouth and Hamel's way forward. They fought and Kamash had died. The only words he had exchanged with Kamash at that time were battle cries, screams and insults. That sort of thing. This guy was a bastard who deserved to die. That had been the case 300 years ago and it was still the exact same case now. As for sympathizing with someone who had been resurrected as an undead, regardless of his own will and granting him peace, such a thought had never once even crossed Eugene's mind. He had already killed this guy 300 years ago. At that time he had fought together with Vermouth. But Vermouth was no longer here. In that case I'll just have to be the one to kill you once more, Eugene muttered wryly as he lowered his arms to his sides before saying to his companions, I'll be heading out first. Is there a need for that? Sienna asked in surprise. Why don't we just fly over together? No way, Eugene resolutely shook his head. He turned to look behind him. Eugene noticed that Anise had a displeased expression on her face. The eyes of the graceful Radiance's priest sitting behind her shone brightly. Whoosh! Wings of black flames erupted from Eugene's back. It's too early for me to need your help, Eugene informed them. Sir Eugene, Anise protested. I'm just going to go and kill a giant. Why would I need your help already? Eugene grumbled as he turned around. Kamash wasn't the only one waiting ahead in the desert. There were dozens of huge demonic beasts in the undead army as well. There might even be other demon folk lying in ambush. He probably won't be able to recognize me, Eugene silently assessed Kamash. It was only natural for that to be the case. However, Kamash should be able to recognize Vermouth's white flame formula. However, that might not be the case if this guy's brain had completely rotted away until the giant had lost all sense of reason. But if he had even a sliver of consciousness left, there was no way that Kamash wouldn't remember Vermouth's flames. After all, they were the flames that had killed him. So if Kamash remembered those flames and recognized them, would he really be able to stand still and wait for Eugene to arrive? I'll be done by the time you get there, Eugene promised as he took off into the sky. Whoosh! The wings of prominence flapped in the air. Black flames enveloped Eugene's whole body. Soon Eugene had transformed into a black comet that pierced through the sky. His head was fuzzy. Right now the only thing that he knew was what kind of state he was in. He didn't know how much time had passed, but... I died, Kamesh slowly thought to himself. What had happened to the followers he had taken with him to bring down the humans' walls? What had happened to his siblings? His father, what had happened to his father? It wasn't like Kamesh didn't have such thoughts. However, he wasn't driven to find the answers to these questions. Amelia had made it so he couldn't muster up the urge to follow those idle thoughts. All that Kamesh could focus on was the memory from the moment that he died. It was a memory of how he had died and who had killed him. Amelia didn't think that anything else was necessary. There was no need for any elaborate memory and personality manipulation like what had gone into creating Hamel's Death Knight. While making Kamesh into an undead, all Amelia wanted from him was simple, overwhelming violence. Therefore, any emotions that weren't needed to supply such violence had been suppressed. The reason Kamesh's head was so cloudy was that there was a void left in his emotions. He had the memories but none of the emotions that should have accompanied them. When he recalled the memories of his siblings and father, the current Kamesh couldn't feel any of the corresponding emotions of longing, worry, or sadness. The only memory that did spark something was the memory of what he had seen prior to his death. A flurry of slashes, a non-stop barrage of attacks, various different weapons, and those flames. Kamesh slowly began to stir. The memory was growing stronger. It had touched on something deep within him. A light began to shine inside Kamesh's cloudy head. This light became a bolt of lightning that lit up his confused consciousness and caused his body to react. Boom. Kamesh began walking forward. Slowly, ever so slowly, his face began to show an expression in reaction to that memory. As his face twisted into a grimace, Kamesh glared up at the sky. Vermouth, Kamesh growled. The flames were still approaching. Hamel, the king of the giants, spat out his enemies' names with hatred.